Nice to see everybody again so short after our April convening. We're excited to continue our work and our discussion that we started last week around developing our BHAG for the next 6 months. And so we've got several items on the agenda today for us to continue that discussion and to think about what direction do we want to take our work in for this committee over the course of the rest of this year. So I am going to turn that, kind of look back at some reflections. I know several of you had gotten started on the Jamboard, and so I am going to drop that link into the chat if you have not had a chance. And we're going to take about 10 minutes or so for you all to read some of the responses and then to add your own. And this is anonymous, so please, feel free to say whatever you need to say. So we've got 3 questions to consider on that Jamboard today. What are you excited about? What are you unsure about? And then what do you need to know about? Which is terrible grammar, but we'll call it what it is. So if you'll add in, the sticky note is on the far left under that arrow in a circle. It looks like a little piece of square paper, and you can make as many sticky notes as you want to and make them whatever color. So if you'll take a moment to just reflect on our conversation from last week, reflect on the direction that we had lots of learning going on in our 2 separate committee sessions, and kind of answering those questions for the group so we can kind of come to some consensus today and some understanding today about the direction that we need to go for the next 6 months. Okay, so looks like I think everybody that had something they wanted to add has had a chance to do that. And if you're still typing, feel free to continue to add to this. Like I said a minute ago, I'll send a link out to this on email again, just so everybody has a chance, especially those that were not able to attend with us today, has a chance to look at some of the comments and the questions. So looking at the first page, what are you excited about? So lots of excitement about making sustainable change, moving forward, excited about the possibilities with our vision, some comments on Portrait of a Learner, and working with other subcommittees to share work. Excited about Portrait of a Learner. We're intentional on focusing on concrete policy strategies and practices that support marginalized and underserved students. And then excited about moving forward with the work and the possibility of working with other committees. And then the second question, what are you unsure about? Which hopefully we can answer some of these questions today. Some recap on day 2, which we can come into here in a little bit. Several questions regarding legislative support and policymakers and how we're going to do that impact. Some questions about the directive for the group and how that's connecting with the work that we did over the last 6 months. Questions about alignment of focus and decisions between the 3 committees. And then some accountability and for reading and literacy, and how are we going to make that a focus. And then the last question, we are going to talk some about collaboration with other committees today. Susan, do we have somebody in from one of the other committees, or Jennifer? I thought we had a visitor today from one of those.
Yeah, Karen. Oh, sorry. Good. Karen Perry is here. I was going to say.
Okay, from Vibrant Learning.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Awesome. And then some questions. Again, going back to the work that we did the previous 6 months, and then defining next steps. And then having some broader overview of assessment and accountability before we start discussing individual parts. And then a copy of every pilot program currently running in Kentucky. I don't know how to answer. The rest of the questions I feel like we can kind of have a discussion on, but that's a new one. And I don't know if I can answer that question. I might punt that over to somebody at KDE. I don't know if they have the answer to that either, on pilot programs running in Kentucky right now.
And Sarah, just one quick reminder to everyone, you may see your question already up there, or your thoughts already up there. And if you want to duplicate and put it back up there, because we're interested in how many people have the same question too. So some of you may say, oh, my question's already up there, or my thoughts are already up there. If you just want to duplicate and say, hey, I also have the same question, that would help us out a lot, great deal.
That's a great point, Kathy. Thank you. Okay, so we are moving forward with some committee work. I'm trying to tackle questions in order from easy to hard. So we are moving forward with having some joint committee work. I think we're going to talk some more about that today as well, as we kind of get into our BHAG and where that's taken our direction. I definitely want to make some connections between the awesome work that you all did from the first 6 months and the research report that we pulled out, and how we can connect that to where we want to go forward. And then, other question, some discussion about accountability and assessment and kind of what that really is. I know there was a question up here about that. What do we need to know more about? So things to explore for us. And then how is literacy going to fit in? Okay. So connecting to that with the questions that we've had, several of those are questions that I think we're going to have to do some further exploration about, both as a committee and as some leadership discussions as well. I don't know if we're going to get all those answers to those questions today, is what I'm saying, because I really was more interested in kind of figuring out where you all were in the process to see where we need to go from there. Kathy, did you have anything you wanted to add in on any of these questions in particular for right now?
Oh, you're muted again, Kathy. Kathy, we can't hear you.
I don't know if Kathy might have lost some signal.
No,
My computer.
I'm here.
Okay, there you are. Okay.
The one question, it seems that we need to review the comments made during the meeting before we proceed. And I'm not quite sure what comments you're referring to. Are you referring to the council meeting? If you could just, that one, I don't know what we're referencing. What more do you need to know? And someone wrote, it seems that we need to review the comments made during the meeting before we proceed. And I'm thinking they're talking about the meeting when the full council came together.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't have to say who you are, because all of this is anonymous, but I just hope we can get to that, because it's not really clear what you're wanting us to share.
Well, I don't mind saying this in that question. There were several concerns expressed by the superintendents in the council meeting about accountability structure. It's an assessment, and it seems to me we need to discuss that as a committee. And I think it deserves discussion. There wasn't really a discussion around it, but there were a lot of people who had some real concerns about it.
Can you be a little bit more specific than that, Betty? Like, as far as what concerns they were bringing up?
There were a lot of concerns about student accountability, about inaccurate data, about a structure in which we're not working, not receiving accurate data. For us to continue without discussing that and the implications for our work. Number one, if we're not going to pay attention to what they say, we shouldn't invite them to speak. And number two, it seems like pretty critical information, concerns you heard from every superintendent.
Right.
Students didn't take it seriously. So I think we need to discuss that. Can be wrapped up in the end and some of our plans, but that issue does seem to be an important issue for us to discuss at some time.
I'm fine with discussing it now. I know we want to make sure that we're getting to our goal for the next 6 months today, but I kind of feel like that's a discussion that we need to pull forward because it's going to inform our goal and where we're going with that.
Is that issue already raised in our design principles?
I'm not sure. Let me pull those back
I
up.
mean, like it may be that we've addressed that in our design principles, that it's
Yeah, I think you're right, Suzanne. There was
Could
Suzanne,
be.
right, who said that. So, like, yes. So we took some of those concerns and then indeed translated them into those design principles. And to me, this indeed brings up this question about, what is the most productive way for us to address these issues? And one way is of doing it through streams of work, and then sort of like making sure that either one of our work streams has explicitly a particular focus, or that theme that somebody is worried about sort of gets called out and paid attention to in the work streams that we have through things like the design principles. So I feel like we can definitely make room for that. And I would encourage you, Betty, for example, if you have, and everybody else really, if you have specific sets of concerns, to always make sure that they don't get forgotten and brushed under the carpet, but that we need to find as a committee, obviously, some ways in which we can structure work moving forward in which we can sort of tackle issues. Yeah. Susan,
Wondering,
you want-
Betty, if it might just make sense to name the concern you're referring to. Are you talking about the motivational concerns in terms of students because of the lack of accountability? Is that what you're bringing forward here, Betty?
Well, there are a couple things. Number one, we had the council, the planners went to great work to bring in people to really discuss things. And it
Mhm.
seems that, and I know we did broad global reflections, but it seems to me that as a subcommittee, it would be worth our while to see if we have any reflections or any things we need to address beyond what we have already. And if it's already in the work and it's somehow like highlighted, but it just seems strange to me to have people come and to talk and then nothing happens after that. So we sit and listen to people for 2 days. They prepared, they were very passionate what they had to say. It just seems logical to me that they then discuss that and see if there's anything there that's an implication for our work. That's just me.
Okay, so this is an open floor for discussion at this point then. Comments, questions, pulling up design principles, which I'll share that back in the chat as well.
This is Ernie. I am
Mhm.
having some technical issues, so I do have my video turned off. But I agree with Betty. I guess I kind of get lost in the process because the first 6 months we were focusing on accountability and assessment and what it means and what our system might look like going forward as it relates to in-state, out-of-state, and what happened before. So of course, I did work with Betty on the, on the Kira model and kind of what happened then, so we can kind of know moving forward, have extensive knowledge of what to do or what not to repeat. So, but then I also missed day one of the last session that we just had. So I'm kind of playing a little catch up too. So I'm a little concerned about, next steps. Cause, in my mind, I've been focusing on, what would our accountability system look like? The key components moving forward, making sure we have the design principles in place. And then we kind of now it seems like we're jumping to another task that may not really be focused on accountability, and assessment. So that's kind of my question. Do we have another job to do now versus the accountability and assessment piece? And I'm okay with that. I mean, I'm okay with being flexible and doing multiple things, but I guess because it kind of feels like it's being steered toward a new direction.
Ernie, can I try rephrasing a question to you and see whether this resonates? One of the concerns that I know that came up was this idea that we are suddenly talking almost exclusively about the portrait of a graduate. And I think some people felt, and they've articulated it certainly to us in certain moments, that that is maybe a narrowing of the perspective, even though that isn't, like that depends on how you work those kinds of issues. Like in fact, when we talk about the work streams in a minute, I think there's ways in which, in fact, one of the work stream is currently proposed based on conversation that we had to map out different kind of assessment and accountability systems locally and how that goes to the state. So I don't think that that is necessarily in conflict, but if that's the concern, if there's questions around the portrait of a graduate, maybe that's a way we could anchor this.
Well, I agree. I think you're correct there. I can see how that definition, the portrait of learning or the POG
Right.
of the graduate, whatever it ends up being called,
Right.
how that would drive or the focus of the accountability and assessment model, because it could be reduced to a simplified to those elements. Absolutely, it's a very important. So if the new system, if the new model is totally, if it's approved that the new model must govern a POG or a POL learning capacity, then that's what we would have to use to develop our accountability and assessment model. Totally agree with that. So I do think it's very important. So that part of it doesn't concern me, because I think that's moving
Right.
toward a potential model. Because I think the model, I think the definition and what's going to be in the model, and it has to be created before you can develop a monitoring or a system in itself. You got to have the pieces. So that's going to be the baseline, then evolves from there.
So I'm hearing, so one of those pieces being portrait of a learner, possibly. Another piece being student accountability, which Betty's correct. We had that discussion on day one with superintendents, actually both days, multiple times, about the student accountability portion of it.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else?
I mean, there can be several parts of accountability system or assessment system. It just seems it just seems like Arnie was saying, you would want to have a broader overview of how you see the system before you start creating the parts that support the system, instead of creating parts and then seeing if you could fold it into a system.
Yeah, to Betty's point, I think if you listen to those panel discussions that we heard on both of those days, there were multiple issues that were brought up by all of those panelists, and I think we need to be aware of those things, and that needs to enter into our conversation as we move forward. I mean, because the whole purpose in them coming was to share their perspective and their experience, and I think we need to recognize that, and that needs to be part of our conversation moving forward. I mean, the one that stands out to me is that, I think about what Marty Polio said, do it for Marty. Well, we need to think about why are students not engaged in this, and as we develop something moving forward, we need to figure out how we engage students and it's meaningful to them.
So thank you, Jerry. So as we're thinking about how to move forward, let's kind of direct this towards the goal. What do we want the outcome to be at the end of this work? What are we looking for at the end of this work based on our design principles, based on the research that we've done? What is our goal?
I'm just going to say this is not a goal, but I think we have to be willing to know that design principles might change as we get into discussions. And if when we were talking about the student accountability, and there were two principles that could be, if it's the one principle three, I don't think that addresses accountability. And if it's in the design for transparency, trust, and reciprocal accountability, it would fit there. So not knowing where you're thinking.
Right, but
Do
Betty,
we
you're right.
have
there
we
might be-
discussed, does everyone know what we mean when we say accountability for Kentucky? If not, then that seems like a pretty good starting place.
So
Okay.
we've taken your sticky notes and reflected on the conversations that we've had in at the convening to sort of put some ideas on the table about where our work might go next. Sarah, I'm wondering if this might be an okay time to introduce those, and I think some of our reflections will resonate in these ideas.
Mhm. Yes, yes, I agree with that. Let's go just to kind of give us some ideas on the table, and then we can try to focus around one of those, and come back to those questions that we've been asking to, or circle around with those as well. How do those questions fit in? What is accountability, as Betty just pointed out? What does that truly mean for Kentucky? What are the parameters with federal and state guidelines, and so forth?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think all of those good questions sort of fit in. So I'm dropping a link. It's in our shared Google Drive, and also I'll share my screen for those of you not on your phone, or sorry, on your phone. So we sort of looked at the stickies and realized that we have some emerging priorities here, and all of these are just draft, and we can change them through this discussion and conversation. Hopefully they will evolve. Our priorities being, we're interested in moving forward with cross-committee collaboration. We want to be in sync with what the other committees are doing. We want to be more in touch with that and influence their work and have their work influence ours. We want to sharpen our focus on the needs of marginalized and underserved students. This is particularly in the area of reading and literacy, but other concerns have arisen. And so making sure we're keeping the needs of those most vulnerable children at the center of our work. And then a deep concern to build off and learn from the work that we've done in the past 6 months. That message became clear on both days of our convening together. And so we have some ideas that we've put together based on our conversations of how we might effectively address these priorities in defining our next 6-month goal. Our committee leadership has expressed a preference for sticking together in some way to identify a singular goal. And then, yes, of course, we're going to need to operationalize the work and divide and figure out who's taking on what. But rather than saying, oh, we're going to have multiple work streams that are looking at all of these things, I think the desire is to come together around a singular goal and then figure out where to go from there. So the first option here would to be very squarely build off of the work that we've done. And I think this might be what Betty and Jerry and Ernie were just talking about in terms of, okay, given what we've learned from outside Kentucky and within Kentucky, what are some possible models for a future assessment and accountability system in Kentucky? And what does accountability even mean? Are we talking about at the local level, the state level, the federal level, figuring out where our area of focus should be, and sort of looking at the trade-offs of where we might want to focus our design efforts and focus our recommendations. So really exploring everything that based on everything we've learned in the past 6 months, what then might that mean for a future of Kentucky, and exploring different models within our policy context. Now that, however, does not build on cross-committee collaboration as nicely as some of the other ideas. So another idea, this second idea here, would be that we could work together with the Vibrant Learning Experiences Committee. Right now, they're working on gathering what is a portrait of a learner and how is that operationalized in different districts? How are districts doing defenses of learning? How are they operationalizing competency assessments in order to show competency against the portrait? How are they thinking about things like scoring and what impact do those types of systems have on student learning experiences? So there's an opportunity for us to collaborate and work towards our long-term goal of a systems bank, sort of be thinking about, based on what we know from our design principles, what we've learned from play elsewhere, what does that mean for high quality systems? And what might the design specifications be for a future systems bank if we were going to use that systems bank to house information about local portraits of a learner or portraits of graduates? This would also maybe include considerations about technology. I know Azure-D, the group you were in with day 2 was talking about interoperability. How does student artifacts or their evidence of learning, how does that transfer with them as they move from district to school or site? And so that sort of would be an opportunity for us to influence design specifications around that systems bank. And this third opportunity would be separate from what we've done in the past 6 months, but it would lean into an opportunity that's available for us with the Bold New Futures Committee. The State Board of Education is moving forward with considering a graduation requirement around a portrait of a learner. And so this would be an opportunity for our committee to discuss and weigh in on what might be our recommendations related to that graduation requirement from a technical perspective, from an assessment and accountability perspective, based on what we've learned and where we'd like to see that happen in the state of Kentucky. So that these are ideas on the table. I'm sure that there are more ideas, so please feel completely at liberty to raise those, but hopefully this can help our discussion. I hoped for us to sort of go through and as a whole group talk about the benefits and trade-offs of exploring each one of these. But before we do that, I want to pause and see if there are any clarifying questions or if there's an idea missing that we should make sure is represented up here. I'm happy to add a row to the table.
Thank you, Susan. So that opens it up to everybody else then. Is there something else that you want to put on the list for priorities? Or is there something else that you want to put into for ideas before we start kind of going pros, cons on each of these?
Just a question, since I generally understand the vibrant learning experiences and what they're doing. But from what I heard, they were talking about doing this next 6 months. I don't see how they could be at a point to be discussing these banks of and specifications for assessment accountability systems. It just didn't sound like they'd be at that point.
Karen, I'm sure I misrepresented your work of your Vibrant Learnings Committee. Would you like to speak to what it is you're doing over the next 6 months and how we might be able to support you all in that?
Yeah, I was just in the process of saying we are not speaking in very technical terms yet as a standing committee, except to say, you know, of course, our focus is to advance vibrant learning, to both understand what vibrant learning is, get a sense of when, where, how it's happening around the state, and then to figure out how we can support folks in making more vibrant learning happen. And so I would say we're not quite yet to the point of talking in very technical terms about how to capture all of that. But when we have these conversations about vibrant learning, it very quickly moves to how these vibrant learning experiences are leading into portrait of a learner like experiences, portrait of a learner like artifacts and evidence that come out of that kind of learning. And so although we haven't fully turned that corner yet, I would say that we are interested our committee had a similar conversation about we should really talk with the accelerating innovation people about how to bring these two things together. So we don't have it fully baked yet, but we are definitely interested in learning alongside with you and embarking on a joint effort with this committee, which is largely why I'm here today. I hope that answered your question.
Thank you,
I mean,
Karen.
it seems as you're doing that work, it would be great to parking lot or something. If you have ideas, oh, this would be a great way to do that. But it's just a parking lot for what you're doing first. I mean, when you talk, because it sounds like you have a great plan that makes a lot of sense to me, and it's just while you're having those discussions and if you think, oh, this wouldn't be a good way to assess that, then you can just put that in a parking lot to deal with later when we get together.
We are certainly willing and interested in both co-designing some learning together with you or collecting data or information on your behalf that may be helpful to your more technical aspects. We are interested in either or both of those options as we go forward, because we certainly see a lot of overlap between the two efforts.
Yeah, one thing that we had talked about in our committee was sort of the extended case studies. So, you know, we did an example of that. Like we had an initial conversation with Brian Kriesman from Fleming and with Adam Hicks from Shelby during our day 2 meeting. And we asked them essentially some more, let's call them technical questions about sort of the implementation and, you know, how they're going about implementing curricula and defenses of learning and how they understand what is effective and not. And, you know, one thing is to extend that, right, to both for these 2 districts and some other selected districts and sort of do a few more deep dive case studies and just learn how to document the essential core information and learn how to talk about, you know, what similar and different characteristics are. So that's certainly, and I know that you have a lot of entry points into like local districts and you know how to sort of talk to them, you know, what's too much of a burden, what's feasible. And so I thought that for us, that would be, we were talking that would be a really good connection point. And the other one is, you know, to Systems Bank, I will quickly mention, Karen, it's my understanding that there is no current commitment to any particular technology or organization that's external to Kentucky, right? Like in a sense, it's not like we're sort of saying, oh, we love the Canopy project and we want to be part of, eventually like move toward becoming part of that or something else. Because that of course affects also like the degree to which you attack or tackle any of these design and specification tasks.
We had a similar conversation in our committee as well. We talked about, so the Canopy project, for example, is a place that is, it's a website run by Transcend, and they highlight, you know, vibrant learning in their words from across the country. We wanted to create a Kentucky version of that. We actually had a good discussion about who should own that. What's the way to do that? Should that come out of KDE? Should that be run by somebody else? We didn't really come to any conclusions on that. What we committed to do was build out the infrastructure and collect the data for that just internally in our Google Drive first, so we could figure out these more technical aspects later on. So we did have a similar question as well in terms of the technical aspects of doing that and how to share it more widely. We anticipate that what we collect will be publicly available, but we're not quite sure of all the ways to make that happen just yet. There were questions about accessibility we were being mindful of, and all of those considerations. So right now we're in data gathering mode.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Are there other clarifying questions about anything shown here or additions, something we might have missed when putting together these ideas for us? Okay, so then not hearing anything, why don't we start just talking as a group about some of the benefits and trade-offs? I'd love to hear from folks what they think of this first idea in terms of putting aside the portrait of a learner for now and sort of exploring options more broadly in terms of assessment and accountability. Benefits, trade-offs.
I think this was the point, Susan, where we kind of mentioned defining what accountability means, particularly at the state and federal level.
I think a benefit of this idea too is that I think this is a question that's been raised by the larger Cool Council, and this would be a way to get some answers around that. Like, this was something that was raised by the districts. It was raised by, not raised by legislators, but we know that this is an issue that would have to be addressed through legislation. Is if people want different systems, what are ways that we can try to balance some of the things that we're learning at a local level with what we have to deal with right now? This to me feels like a little bit of working towards some kind of a solution with that barrier, that I don't know that any other committee is going to tackle that issue. So if it's not done by us, it's not going to get done, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But a trade-off being that unless we figure out a way, it's going to be harder to connect with the other committees with this project.
Thank you, Suzanne. Somebody else, other ideas, benefits, trade-offs, questions?
I think, this is Amy Harris. This one, though I'm new to the group, it really aligns to the work that you did over the past 6 months as well.
Amy, have you gotten a copy of that work yet? I didn't know if you were adding. Okay.
Yeah. I'll have it.
And it just seems that as a benefit, this would be fundamental and essential for us to move forward with any type of system structure or recommendations that are aligned. And also recognizes the effort that people put into in the research in the past days and what we could have learned from that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Betty, that was a key piece that I was kind of struggling with myself, just because I felt like we were missing the bridge between the work from the last 6 months to where we're going forward, in order to take what we learned and make it count for something. And I just didn't feel like we had that bridge established or fully fleshed out.
Right.
Somebody else? We can come back to this one later if you think of something later. This is not a speak now or forever hold your peace kind of situation.
Well, one thing that I was thinking about when we think about our work for the last 6 months, I am including the council meeting that we just had as part of our work for the last 6 months. So including, I mean, there's that concern about what the superintendents and other leadership had to say about what's going on. So including that as part of, what we've learned and what we hope to, how we help to use that. Because I think initially when the L3 leaders or L3 districts that were invited, the whole idea was for us to learn from them to help to start moving us forward. It wasn't just having them come and speak to us, but having them come so that we could learn a little bit more about where we need to go in the future. So it may be that as part of our report or reporting, we think about what we've learned. And I'm also interested in knowing, what did the other committees think about what the superintendents and other leadership had to say at our council meeting? How did that impact them and what they're thinking about what the next steps are? Because there was a lot of powerful things that were said and a lot of things that gave you reason to stop and pause. How are we going? And I think that question's already been asked. How are we going to use that? But for us to think about, that's part of what our next reporting process is going to be.
Sarah, could you just confirm for me again, since the headings off of this, is this consideration for our work for the next 6 months, our general considerations? Next 6 months?
Yeah.
Right, this is for our next, what we call in the Cool Council, BHAG, right? Our next big, hairy, audacious goal for the next 6 months. So ideally by the close of today in this meeting, we'll have a consensus around where it is we want to focus our efforts over the next 6 months so that we can spend then time figuring out how we'll operationalize that.
So Susan, if I could just add to that as well. Good afternoon, everyone. I think that as I've listened this evening, we're still in a learning mode. We're still in learning. We're not to the place that we can say, this is our stake in the ground. This is the direction that we want to go with assessments or accountability. So think about, as we discuss these ideas, or as Susan has said, other ideas, what we want to learn about, what would be beneficial for us to come to an understanding, a better understanding of, so that we can eventually then make recommendations about future assessment and accountability systems. Now, this is open to our members and the decisions that you all want to make moving forward. And we're not putting our thumb on the scale for any of these. And we want you to define for us collectively as a group what we want to learn more about.
Thank you, Jennifer. If there's no more commentary on this first
Let-
idea, and as Sarah said, we
But
can come back to it. Oh,
Let me add one other
Oh,
thing.
Jerry,
One of the
please.
things that one of the things I heard on day 2 pretty clearly in our discussions was that we need to really have a better understanding of what all of the L3s are doing. We listened to 2 of them in our subgroup meeting there, Shelby and Fleming, and that was a pretty high level demonstration of what they were doing. And I think there's just an interest out there to understand what are the other L3s doing, what's working. For us to have a better idea of that, I think would be important in our discussion moving forward.
I appreciate that, Jerry. I'm wondering if that better fits actually in idea 2, right? Because all of the L3s are engaged in this process of local design, local assessment and accountability, many of them focused on the portrait of a learner. So I'm wondering if the second idea might give us a clearer picture of what it is, what's happening in the L3s, or the second idea at least would give us an opportunity to go out and gather that picture. Does that resonate with you, Jerry?
It does. Yeah, I think you're probably right. It would probably fit better with that second one.
And Jerry, I wanted to quickly follow up with you also and say, can you just say a few words about what comes to your mind when you're thinking about the information? And I'll tell you why I'm asking that afterwards.
Well, I think, we saw basically with Shelby County how they were using the portrait of the learner in their local accountability work. And I don't know that Shelby County's really led to a true accountability system. Fleming County gave a pretty high level approach in terms of what they're doing. I just think it's important for us to understand some of the nuts and bolts that are a part of the work that they're doing. And if they have reached a point where it is truly, back to Betty's point, understanding what accountability is in Kentucky and what the expectations are, what are the L3s doing that are leading to some type of local accountability that could be meshed with a full state accountability system?
Right. Yeah, thanks for saying that. And I let me tell you why I was asking you this. I appreciate that explanation because there's multiple entry points into sort of this capturing of information from local districts, right? So part of it has to do with like their local theory of selection. Part of it has to do with their local systems, how mature they are. Part of it has to do with the evidence that they're seeing about how effective their sort of reimagined practices are. And two things that we've experienced, and I think that's for us, I think it's really a cross-committee issue, but certainly for us, it's this issue like, what's the right sweet spot? Like, right, what are the kind of questions and features for these local systems that we want to learn something about? So this is, for example, something that we could crowdsource within our committee from all of you and say, like, you know, if you had a choice, like, what are the kind of pieces of information that you'd be interested in? And then the second part is, you know, Karen was just sharing with me that there is, for example, a subcommittee under VLE that looks at the evidence of how effective some of these local solutions are. And Karen, I hope I say that right, but maybe, you know, for example, if you already have a committee that's working on some of these outcome-related issues, maybe, you know, it's we could learn from, you know, which L3s and or which district you select, how you're looking at what effectiveness means. And maybe that already covers something for us that's really relevant to our members. Ken, do you mind speaking to that maybe for a second if you heard that?
I'm sure. Vibrant Learning broke into 3 subcommittees or subcommittees. I don't know, however many. Anyway, smaller groups. And one smaller group is focused on entry points into the work. How to, if you don't feel like you're doing a lot of Vibrant Learning, how could you get started? So that's one subcommittee. One subcommittee is the Canopy Project idea, which is where it's happening and what's happening and all of that. But one subcommittee, which I think is probably most closely aligned with your work here, is focused on collecting evidence of Vibrant Learning happening. So how do we know that this is happening? What are the outcomes that come out of that? In terms of student work, what are, you know, classroom look-fors? What kind of artifacts and evidence could a school pull together to say that they're doing Vibrant Learning? And what kind of learning outcomes are coming out of that? And so I think that's why I say I think there's lots of crossover opportunity here. I feel pretty confident speaking also to the L3 question that's been raised here. I think if you can articulate the specific things you want to know from the L3 districts, we can do a collection of that for you. Or if, you know, I know that you've had some people individually come and speak to you, but if there's kind of a laundry list of things that you want to know from each one of the L3s, even if they're in different places, we can certainly put that forth to them and ask things like what Andre was mentioning. What is your theory of action? What is this synopsis of the innovative practice you're trying to pull off? How are you assessing the outcomes of that? What are you learning from that opportunity? Like, you know, if you can put together your list of what you want to know, L3s are happy to respond to that, and they know that's part of what they'd like to contribute to the conversation too. So you know, but we do have a subcommittee that is focused on collecting data broadly defined from Vibrant Learning, broadly defined.
Who is chairing that, or is there like a person who's the contact person for that, whatever the language is, Karen? Do you?
What was the question? Who's leading
The
that?
question was like, do you have a leader, like a leader of that work, contact person for that work, for the evidence base?
Yeah, when we broke up into our work time, I would say Susan Dougal in that subcommittee. Susan Dougal was there, Carmen Coleman was there, Travis Hamby was there. Those kind of folks who have a lot of experience. That would be Shelby, JCPS, and Allen County representation. There were some other folks in that standing committee too, but those were the 3 that I can picture in my head.
Okay.
Sitting over there.
Thanks.
We do have a committee meeting next Monday, just like y'all are doing now. We do have a committee meeting next Monday to try to kind of tie a bow on some of these things, just to clarify, just like what you're doing.
Thank you, Karen. That is super helpful. So I want to give some space for our committee members to consider this second idea about working in collaboration with the Vibrant Learning Experiences Committee to get a good idea of what's happening in the L3 districts, what's happening in the state, around local portraits of a learner, and how might we be thinking about evidence of quality, evidence of effectiveness, what might be going into a systems bank, or what might be some specifications that we'd want to create around that. So are there benefits? Are there trade-offs? What do you see as the pros and cons of pursuing this idea?
I'm not sure if we're going to be at the point to do design specifications. I think that there's certainly something can do with that. Sounds more like Q1 of 24 than it does Q4 of 23, 3 and 4. It just but do design specifications just before you're getting ready to create it, and I don't think I can't imagine that. Maybe I'm just wrong. Maybe I don't have the high enough expectations, but it seems like we need a lot of information before we go there. And this is just, this other one is doesn't say anything to do with that, but that next sentence, determine the features of technical qualities for all learners and demonstrate excellence. Well, all students aren't going to demonstrate excellence. So it's excellence the work we want to do there. Use there.
I agree with what Betty said about taking out the design specifications on that end. I think if we had a more clear idea of, and I like what you put in there, Susan, about goals, like if we have a more clear idea of what the purpose is and what our goals are for the accountability system, once we have those defined, then we would be able to start talking down into like the specifications for what that's actually going to look like. I think even to the capacity of the part where it's making sure that all learners are accounted for and considerations are given to all learners, including our marginalized ones. Because I don't think we can do that. I don't know if we're going to be able to do that in the next 6 months when we still haven't decided what the purpose and the goals are for the accountability system.
Yeah, I know we're all excited about getting there, but I just think there's a lot of groundwork and footwork to do before we get there.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of like what Jennifer said earlier. You know, we're continuing to assess, to learn about these pieces. We're not in any way, fashion, or form in a position to develop yet. So I think if we could use that, continue to assess and evaluate, and then we get to the developing phase. I think that's where I kind of get crossed up, because that's what I thought we were doing. We're learning about all the different aspects, but then when we use this language, develop, design, we're not there yet. And that's when I kind of start to freeze up. So.
Oh, this is super helpful. I'm going to read what I've revised and see if that captures what our concerns are here. So in coordination with the Vibrant Learning Committee, we're going to develop a purpose statement and goals for this bank of local assessment and accountability systems related to the portrait of a learner. We're going to learn about the features of technical quality that are supportive of all learners, and we'll consider the technical features that might allow or support for this cross-district interoperability or portability. Does that sound better, putting us more in the learning mode? Okay.
And Susan, maybe that is what you had in mind with the like determining the goals, but it's sort of like essentially also like the user persona, right? Like essentially it's sort of this iterative design idea of like, if you had a bank, you know, it started cold, you wanted to mock up these low tech or mid tech prototypes at some point and get feedback also from stakeholders most proximate to the problem. In this case, the people who might be using this that you envision, and then seeing, like, is this idea even on target? And I think that's baked in there, but I wanted to call that out as part of the process, maybe.
I don't know if in coordination with the Vibrant Learning Committee I'm not sure how to phrase it, but that sounds like they're doing an awful lot of this work with us, and I'm not sure they're there. So it's something of, there's something, I don't know if it's feedback, it's something, but it's not like at this stage that they're necessarily equal in that, because this is a lot of our work. They have a lot of work to do, and whether they want to take on this too, I kind of doubt right now. But clearly we need to coordinate our work. And maybe it's just me the way I read it, I edit stuff too much.
Maybe it's collaboration.
It's something, I just don't want it to sound like we're doing all this work with them and they have this to do in addition to their work. Part of this is in reaction to this work or in support of their work, and part of it will be whether it's this time or later on, that collaboration on creating some things. And maybe they will be, maybe Karen say maybe they will be ready to do that. Clearly we want that to be a role of connection. And again, maybe I'm just reading too much into it.
Yeah, I think you're making a good point here. It's like right at the beginning of our purpose statement. Maybe we'll just say sort of like we will conduct our work in close communication with the Vibrant Learning Committee. Right, so that we're not duplicating and we're being supportive of each other. But good point. Other benefits or trade-offs or changes to the wording of this idea? All right, so moving on, but not saying goodbye, we'll move to that third idea here. And again, maybe not in coordination with Bold New Futures, but in close communication with Bold New Futures. This would be an opportunity for our committee to weigh in on the graduation requirement regulation that the State Board of Education is considering around a portrait of a learner. We might not yet feel that we're at the place to make these recommendations, given that we haven't done all of this learning that we're hoping to do. However, we did want to make sure it was on the table because this is kind of one of those moments where the State Board of Ed is going to be considering this regulation, whether we're at the table or not. So we want to make sure that if we want to have a say in what they do, we make this opportunity available and that we consider it.
Do we know how much of that work, if any, the Bold New Futures Committee is taking on?
That's a great question. Jennifer, I don't know, or Sarah, Andre, Kathy, if you have any insight into that.
Sure, I can start. So the Kentucky Board of Education, when they met in April, they put together a learning agenda, and they decided that they wanted to learn more about the different aspects of the work and these innovative initiatives that are going on. So they have embarked on learning about these different pieces around vibrant learning experiences, about assessment practices, about accountability systems, and so forth. They are working toward understanding it for a call to action, and they are developing what they want to accomplish over the next little bit. They have reached out and have developed 3 committees that will be leading them around learning about these different things. Sarah Snipes is leading the effort on vibrant learning experiences. Our own Andre Rupp is leading the assessment practices, and then Audrey Gilbert is going to lead around that accountability. So with those connections, it connects to our work in some ways. In other ways, they are going to lead on that. The vibrant learning experiences are being led, and will have input on the learning that they're going to have. So the direction that the board and their learning will be influenced by the members of that committee.
And do you know if the Bold New Futures Committee will be working on the policy that comes out around the State Board of Education regulations related to graduation? I believe so.
Okay.
Yeah, I believe they have one of their 2 subcommittee, so they broke into 2 groups, that committee. I believe one of them is working on the regulatory language, potentially around graduation, but.
Yeah,
Yes.
they broke into 2 committees, one for policy and then the other for communities. Andre?
Oh, I was just going to add, Susan, that's my understanding as well, Jennifer, like based on conversations I've had with Lillian at the convening. And, you know, they have also essentially these like independent work products that are highly relevant to our work that got funded separately, right? With the opportunity analysis, the innovation playbook, I think it's called. And then the third one, I'm blanking on the term right now. But I think from my understanding is that it's very clearly in their target to do work in this area, but also beyond, and really sort of like framing and helping the board shape these conversations around policy. And I wanted to quickly just friendly amendment, Jennifer, to you, or just in addition to your comment about me chairing that one group. So everybody, my goal for this is really truly transparency, but I'm still in a phase 2 where I'm learning what exactly the specific needs are. I just, raised my hand recently, and I talked to some board members doing the convening, and I'm trying to find out like what is actually the kind of work that's most helpful to them. Like, is it that they want to learn about what we are doing, where more broadly where the field is it a mixture of these things? Is it something else? And I'm literally like this weekend or this week, I think I'm getting more details. And once I know more, I will absolutely share that with you all. And I'll make sure that there's open lines of communication and sort of like coherence between what we are doing, what's going on there. But I just don't have anything to share because I simply do not know all of the details yet.
I have a question. If the Kentucky State Board of Education is assessing this summer and this fall to include to modify the Portrait of a Learner graduation requirements, when will it go into effect if approved?
So the regulatory process is long one, Ernie.
Okay.
It takes a while because you have to go through drafts. It has to go to the board. It used to be longer than it is now because all regs had to have 2 reads from the Board of Education, and they've reduced that now down to 1 and an optional 2 reads of a regulation. And so we're looking at probably a good 6 to 9 months regulatory process.
Okay, that's helpful.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if you don't mind, I know I missed our day 2. I would like to clarify if I could, just my understanding. So the board is wanting to implement a graduation requirement from the Portrait of a Graduate or a Learner. And so they're doing learning based on those pieces. And I guess I don't see the distinction between what they're doing and what we're doing. And maybe that's the area why I'm struggling a little bit with the purpose. Is it our intention then as a group to match that because that's their goal, regardless of what we want to do for assessment and accountability? I'm just asking.
So I think that's up to us. I think there's this policy moment where we know this is where they're going and they're interested and we have an opportunity to provide input, or we can say, you know what, that's not our focus, that's not our direction, we're going to be pursuing one of these other ideas. But we wanted to make sure it was on the table so that if we did want to bring our committee's recommendations, we could work towards doing that.
Yeah, and I might build on this. Something that comes to my mind more and more is sort of this idea that, you know, I would love our committee to be a resource also as part of these processes, right? And that builds on what you were saying, Susan, which is like, if someone else is doing some work that others may not have visibility into, but that's really quite impactful on the processes, that they sort of say, well, you know what, I should check in with the Accelerating Innovation Committee and sort of see what kind of recommendations they might have as part of that process. And that may happen earlier in the process or later in the process. So for example, you know, if there's different kinds of, let's say there's 3 different models or 3 different types of language, really, because it's always very broad anyway, about like graduation requirement at the state level, that essentially impose different kinds of either constraints, or they suggest different kinds of models for what districts have to do, then, you know, we could sort of walk that through, right? Like, which is sort of connects very closely to our first goal of saying, you know, what do different models look like? And so I think it would be nice if we got to that place where we don't have to sort of like force our way in, but it's more like the other way around. People are thinking about this kind of work and they're saying, like, you know, everybody, these 3 committees essentially have different perspectives on the similar issues that we are working on as the cool council, and I may benefit from that perspective. So let's ask them.
I mean, generally graduation requirements are the what and not the how, or how that is demonstrated.
Yeah, exactly right. And then you can play that out.
But then shouldn't the assessment and accountability, if that's the what or the how, shouldn't our assessment lead them to that end goal? Wouldn't it be counterproductive to go in 2 tangents? Or are we saying the alignment would just be connected?
For now, right now, they're just credits, so many credits in English, so many credits in math, and so many credits in math. They go to a Portrait of a Learner. It may be something around communication, but even if they determine that, unless they're going to build into that demonstration, then if they determine the requirements, then we would certainly want to provide recommendations on how we see that being assessed and accountability connected to that. It just depends how far they go with the graduation requirements and how they define it, whether it's as it's been in the past and it's just this, or if they're going to make it more broadly. But also, I'd hate for them to do that before these committees do this work. I understand that they want to get going on it, but Vibrant Learning seems to be doing a lot of this. I don't know. It just depends how they're going to define graduation requirements and what they want to see in that. If it's just this, or if it's this, and how they do it.
And I would say it goes. Oh, sorry, Betty. I was going to say it goes it goes beyond that even. Like to your earlier point, actually, I want to come back to something you said at the very beginning. This idea of like, or you've said before, also like that we don't want our knowledge and learnings just to go to waste, right? So I think it's not just about sort of the technical implementations and technical even that writ large, but it's also about, you know, the things that we all think about like systemically, like foreseeing some of the intended and unintended consequences that might arise from implementing a particular kind of model, right? Sort of the equity related concerns from and how that might be talked about, captured, thought about in the short, mid, and long term. I mean, I think those are also like, we would be a good committee to at least have a strong voice in that. And I think that would be the moments where, you know, someone like you, Ernie and Betty, would say like, you know what, we know some stuff from CARE. We know what has worked. We know what has backfired. And so I think that collectively we can all put some sort of like wisdom into the table and say like, you know, here's how you might not want to be naive, right? Here's how we can be thoughtful about this and at least try to foresee some of this. I mean, I think that should be part of, personally, I think that would be a really valuable place for our committee to contribute as well. Beyond just sort of like narrowly assessing and being.
I think we can certainly say that the current graduation requirements are neither vibrant nor innovative.
They are
There's
butts and
it's
seats.
a lot of work to do.
Well, and I think we had discussed as well about even if we don't have this third one as our BHAG, that doesn't mean that we couldn't put together a working group or a subcommittee to address this with the Kentucky Board of Education. Like, even if that's not the direction that we're taking as a whole committee for the next 6 months, that we could offer our input, particularly those of you that had researched what has and has not worked in the past, because your research has a lot to add to that conversation. I don't know of any L3 that is assessing their portrait of a learner without doing defenses, because if you're talking about making that part of the graduation requirement, then you're talking about making defenses part of the graduation requirement, because I don't know of any other way to assess that besides having a student present some type of portfolio, exhibition, what have you, to somebody.
And if the design is not complete, they're putting the cart before the horse again.
Right. Well, and I think the L3s that are doing defenses, they're not doing it as a graduation requirement right now.
Right. They're
Because they legally,
piloting.
you
Yeah.
cannot hold somebody's diploma legally if they put their butt in their seat long enough to get the credits. I think there are some districts, and I know Eminence is one of those, where you have to meet the exemplars to participate in any type of promotion activities. So walking the graduation line or going to the end of the year promotion party in middle school. Like, you cannot participate in those if you do not meet the exemplars for that grade level. Now, students have multiple chances to do and redo. And I think they've held a hard line on that from the conversations that I've had with Buddy Berry, who's the superintendent of that district. And Kathy, you went, I think Kathy went on the site visit to them at the end of March, where they hold a hard line on that, because that's part of their local accountability, and what they believe is so truly important is that students, they have exemplars from kindergarten through 12th grade, like a list of things that students are expected to do and master at each grade level. So they can't prevent you from promoting, because they legally can't do that. They can't say you can't go on to first grade. You can't graduate high school, but they prevent you from doing the fun stuff basically right now.
All right. So this has been a really illuminating discussion. Thank you for weighing in. So we have now 3 proposals on the table that we've considered, and a possible 4th proposal, which is just taking this 3rd idea and making that a subcommittee as saying, okay, you know, maybe that's not going to be our BHAG, but we'll have a subcommittee of us working on that and ready to provide recommendations from our committee when the time is right for the board. So I'd love to move us into some sort of vote. However, Andre realized in our charter that we never fully articulated our voting protocols. We know what it takes to establish a quorum, but we didn't actually say if we would need a full majority or a 2/3 majority or 90% consensus. And so, Eddie, absolutely. Sorry, I'm just reading the chat. Eddie's weighing in. It might be good to have a conversation with the board. Absolutely. So if we go with that third idea, or if we have a subcommittee explore that third idea, absolutely, we'll get a look at the draft regulations and we'll be in close communication with Andre, who will be communicating with the board, and also with the Bold New Futures Committee that will be working similarly on this effort. So Eddie's just calling out, we need to get that information. He's right. So let's just stick, let's first, maybe Andre, you could facilitate a conversation around our voting protocol, and then we'll figure out how to proceed from there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so what this stuck out to us the other day when we were saying, you know, we need to vote on something. Let's look this up in our charter, you know, good best practices. But turned out that for some reason that either slipped through the cracks or there was a little editorial mishap that on that one point. And so right now what the charter says is essentially that a quorum is a simple majority. And my proposal, let's have a discussion about this, but my proposal would be to keep it simple and use essentially Robert's rules and just say, like, look, you have to have at least the majority of people present to have a quorum to take any action like this. So if we have 22 people, for example, on our committee, I think that's our count, then 12 should be one more than half in an even number. Those should be present in the moment where a vote is being taken. And then the next step is, out of those, is simple majority then. So if you have, let's say, you need 12, but turns out you have 14 on that day present, everybody votes, then the majority of that is actually 8. So you would have to have 8 people who would then have to be in favor of something, right? So it's you determine how many people you need to take an action, see whether you have that, then you see how many people are actually there, which is a little bit more than that number that you need. And then in terms of figuring out the majority, is you take the majority of whoever votes. And if you don't have enough people in the first place, then you don't even take an action. Does that make sense? And there's, there is variations of this. The one that I'm going to give is that you may know of others, but a very simple variation would be to require 2/3 rather than half in terms of either the quorum technically or the vote once you have the quorum. So I like the idea of pushing for more consensus on that. But I do also think that if we do votes like this and not everybody can attend, that might be challenging for us. So that's the only thing I might put on as a consideration. But if anyone else has a different suggestion of what would be a sort of a better approach, or whether you have a question for me to explain this one more time, what I was explaining now, please go ahead.
Could you add to that quorum if they have turned over the vote to someone else to vote? Because once the motion you went through got down to 8 people, and 8 out of 22 to pass something seems a little rocky to me. But clearly, some people can't come. But if we send this out in advance, they can vote and turn that over to someone to count that, so they will be counted and will have a voice. They just can't be here. I don't know. I would just hate to think 8 out of 22 are a fraction. Not even
right. Yeah, I hear you, and it brings up for me, I will just quickly respond to this. It brings up for me also this issue of when is a formal vote the best mechanism, even under those rules, right? When we did it with the charter in the first place, we were very deliberate to make sure that everybody could vote offline, had a chance to review this. And so in many ways, you know, you don't end up in sort of an almost awkward situation like this, where you're in a meeting, some people couldn't attend. And even like you know, impromptu, it's even hard, right? That's where the fist to five thing is in. So like in your model, Betty, I think, you know, you'd have to also know that there's a vote today on something so you can sort of defer the vote forward. And so that's where I might even say, you know, I might suggest that any formal voting, for example, we might maybe relegate to an offline procedure so that everybody has a chance to like look at whatever documents it is, and that would take, then you don't even have to worry about the deference of the vote maybe. And that in a meeting like this, if we want like directional alignment, we could do either, you know, hands up, or, you know, that might be the easier fist to five or some version of that. Susan, I don't know what you.
Yeah, I'm actually, for a directional thing, I'm just working on creating a poll here to help us.
Or a poll, yeah.
Just
That's
get a
good
temperature on the room,
Yeah.
and we can sort of see where we are, and move forward from that, because we might have good consensus, we might not have. I think that'd be useful to
Right.
know.
But so before that, so I personally think that's a great idea, but let me make sure I don't lose, or we don't lose that thread of like the voting in general. So, and, you know, we can propose, you know, I think what I want to do maybe with that is to write that up in that language that we're just talking about, and then send that around to everybody, and just sort of give everybody, because a week doesn't matter at this point, right? Just like give everybody a week and say, like, you know, if we went with this model where we say, you know, at least half the people on our committee should vote on any critical issues. When we have a vote, we'll do this generally offline, so that people have some time to review the materials. And then let's say, and then we could think about, yeah, maybe I'll ask you all the question about like simple majority versus 2/3 under that model, which then is a different kind of question. And so maybe that's actually, when I say this out loud, maybe that's what I'll do. Send that out to our committee after this meeting tomorrow, maybe, and then you can look at that, and then we get some clarity on the voting process generally. And then Susan, yeah, then right now, unless somebody else has something that they want to share right now, like a really good idea for consideration, feel free to do that, or send me an email after this meeting, you know.
All right. So I'm gonna put up the poll, and take your time to respond. I hope nobody has technology issues. Let's give it a try.
Let's do it.
And Susan, what I would say, it would be just the members of the committee, not us as facilitators or our additional staff that are here.
Thank you, Jennifer. Great clarification.
Susan, could you zoom out just a little bit so we can see that first one in its entirety again? Because we can see 2 and 3. I don't know if that's possible. That makes it worse or better. Maybe
Worse.
just drop the link in the chat. Yeah, that makes it worse. Drop the link in the chat again if you don't mind.
You bet. Sorry about that.
And Susan, just to be clear, like the way you framed this, the thing is, if you could choose one and only one out of these lines of work, which one? And is the question, which one are you more interested in, or is the question, which one do you think is more relevant for the committee, which is not necessarily the same thing?
So let me add to that, is I think that it's for right now. What do you want to learn about and develop right now? Because there will be times in the future, then we'll have, you know, come November, we're going to be looking for a next 6-month goal. So, you know, what do we want to do right this minute, or for the next 6 months?
So we have 8 responses. I think we had 15 members on the line with us today. So we will wait a few more minutes to give folks the time to weigh in.
Andre, do you want to transition over to the Zotero and then come back and let those other four
Sure, I can do
people
that.
have some thinking time or processing time?
Absolutely. So first of all, let me make sure I can share this. So I'm going to share my screen quickly, which will mean this, whatever you see on the screen, everybody will go away. And I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do in just a second. Okay, that's design principles. This is not what this is about. Okay. Okay, I hope you can all see this slide deck that says modern resource management, and I'll give you a little spiel about what I want to do. So I want to, can you all see this? Thumbs up? Yeah, okay, good. All right, so what I want to do for 15 minutes, no more than 15 minutes, is give you a quick introduction to one of the modern resource management programs that we've been using in parallel as you were doing your work for the report. And I want to show you a little bit by pulling the program up, some of the things that you can do with it that are actually really quite helpful. This does not mean it's an either or. It's so some of you will be like, well, I will probably never use this directly, but some of you might. And so if you let's spend 15 minutes on this and see where you end up, and then we'll go from there. So I think the first thing to think about is, so why would I think about a program like this? And there's there's several on the market, so to speak. You may have heard of EndNote, Mendeley, there's ProQuest ReferenceWorks. This is Zotero. I'm going to take Zotero today for a few reasons. And these programs generally allow you to search for and import references. You see this here, creating of references to bibliographies. If you collaborate with other people and you want to share resources, that becomes really easy. They integrate with many major libraries that are on the market. They give you offline access to the resources that you have, and then each one has some unique features. And there's this article that I came across when I was doing some additional research around these and in the medical field, but it's a nice review of like how you might choose between those four. And the message is they do many similar things, and then it's a little bit personal preference. There's some consideration that have to do with it. You know, some of them are commercially owned, some of them are open source. So there's that. So the first thing you might say, like, well, another software, right? Who needs this? Why not just Google Drive? So the answer is, like, Google Drive is actually in many ways very powerful and very helpful. It's easy to access for most people. You can upload text-based documents really well. But the folder architecture is pretty essential, right? Like establishing that and then knowing where documents sit is pretty helpful. And it gets harder the more resources you have and the more each resource has sort of a multiple association for different purposes, for different topics, because now they sit in some folder and then you have to sort of like cross-link them. That's one of the things that's really hard. And then the other part is it's actually, in my experience at least, very clunky to work with non-text-based resources. So think about videos, blogs, websites. Typically, you have to open a new Google document, put links in there, and it gets messy pretty fast as the resources grow. And so the professional programs, they require a brief familiarization period with how this software works, but nowadays a lot of that is relatively quickly after you get used to it. And it's easy to include new resources. You can have folder structures. I'll show that to you in just a second. And they can import and handle quite a variety of resources. And so in our committee, it's my full expectation we'll use both. And I think Google Drive is the dominant one for our normal work, but then there will be moments, I think, where at least some of you might really appreciate having access to this library, which doesn't cost you a thing and is easy. You can also integrate this with browsers, different browsers. So whether you work with Edge or Firefox or Google Chrome or Safari, whatever your favorite browser is, there's a plugin for this that exists. I'll show that to you in just a second. That'll really make adding references so easy. Like you're on a website, you're like, oh my God, this is a good resource. Click, and it gets imported, and that's all you have to do. And then maybe a little bit of like post-editing work. But it is such a time saver for collecting and organizing your resources. So I want to quickly give you a demonstration where I just give you a highlight of some of the most common things that might be relevant to you or to our work. And you can see whether this is helpful to you or not. So I'm going to open up Zotero. So first of all, this is the interface. you can see on the left-hand side here on the top, you see there's a section called My Library, and then on the bottom, then there's a group library. This is the one that I'm going to look at. This is actually the library that I've created on our behalf for our committee. That's why it's called AISC. And if you see here, there's already 160 items in this. This is 160 things that out of which I would guess maybe you all have like found 80-ish or so between websites and blogs and resources across the different work streams that you had. And then we've also come across different ones. And I, you know, every day or so I come across some new one and I add these there. You can see there's a folder structure here that in this case I created, but anybody who is a member of this library can add additional folders. So that works like your normal folders. The wonderful thing about this is in the middle here is your main library. So if you have any article like this, the 50 state school accountability system overview, you can move that to multiple of these folders and it'll not go away from your library. So it's essentially multiple association. So that's already like really helpful. If you're like, oh, this is kind of good if I wanted to look at Portrait of a Graduate and competency-based education. That's one way of doing that, if you like folders. And the other way of doing this is you can assign tags or keywords for each article. That typically has to be done manually, although the program can also read that in if depending on what the source is. And so we'll actually have I think Sandy might have some time. I don't know whether it's 100%, but he said he might have some time to help with this. And Jennifer has found somebody at KDE who can help with this. So one thing that we're going to do is like make sure that from the get-go we get a clean tagging architecture. But then there's a search field here in the top where you can search for, you know, an author, a year, depending on how you set this up. You can search by topic, and as long as everything is tagged properly, you can find things across folders and they come up for you. So that's really, really nice. The other thing is that, and I'm going to show this to you with Portrait of a Graduate here. So there's a folder with Portrait of a Graduate. This only has like 6 references right now in it. There's more in, for example, competency-based education here. But I'm going to go back to the Portrait of a Graduate. What's really nice is that I've really come to appreciate is it handles all of these different media types, which is really otherwise really quite a pain. So you have things like, let's look at this. So here is, let's do something more. Let's do this one. So here's a comprehensive guide. So I just double clicked on this, right? And it brings you immediately to the website that this was hyperlinked to, right? So there it is. This was a website that got stored. So then I can go to the same thing with the Kentucky Association of the Cooperatives. So it's a website. So I can click on that and there's that website. So it's like bookmarking it. For a website, it's like bookmarking it. But I can also do things like this. I can click on this and I get a video. So this is a presentation that I found on YouTube that the Kentucky Board of Education made on Portrait of a Graduate. So there. So, you know, went to YouTube, found this and was, oh, that's a good resource. So I click and it gets imported. And so now you have the direct video link. Then there's things like this, which is a report. States sketch Portrait of a Graduate. So it's a PDF document and you have that right there. And you can also do things like this, a tweet, for example. This was an image from this particular tweet and you can even see the entire tweet history. So if you have anything that and to show you why this is so powerful, if you have anything that you want to add, you can do this in different ways, but I like to just click on here, the plus button here for one moment, and you can see here all the things that you can add manually and or via a plugin. And you see how many different artifacts this can handle. And I think that's really, 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 really helpful. You know, there's like, you can have, what's the word that they're using for like laws or, you know, interviews, articles, blogs, web pages, videos, papers, book sections. So it really makes that very easy. So let me show you 2 more things that I think are also good to know. Let's go to a website. So let's say you're somewhere. So this is my Edge browser. So let's say you're like, I want to know what my friends at KnowledgeWorks are doing. KnowledgeWorks, and I'm sure they have something on competency-based education. And I want some kind of an overview, right? Okay, so KnowledgeWorks, this is Lillian Pace's company, right? And so let's say, oh, this looks really good, right? Let me add this. So you can see here on the top right, there's a little icon. This is the widget where you can save this to Zotero. So I can click on that. This opens up this little field, and now I can see where I want to put this. I mean, there's a default for that, but I could say like, oh, this is for competency-based education. It goes here. I can immediately give it some tags if I want to do so. CBE. I can even do like KnowledgeWorks if I want to call that out. I can sort of do FAQ for frequently asked questions. I can do overview, whatever, like, you know, this is where the tagging architecture, of course, matters. I can click done, and now that's it. And so now this website is incorporated into Zotero, and it's sitting in the right folder. And that works for everything. If you have a PDF or a report, it'll pull the PDF right in. And if the PDF itself is well tagged, like if it's a journal article that you find online, then typically that has all the right citation information. All of that gets imported directly, and you don't have to do any post tagging. And then you can do one last thing I want to show you, and then that should be enough for today. So let's actually two more things. Sorry. One more thing is like, let's say you go, you know, these are some good resources here. I want to share some of them or all of them. I want to just make a bibliography, right? So you can do this. You can select them all, right click, and then you can create a bibliography from these items. And if I open this, you can see, for those of you who have done, you know, from our academic careers or whatever, you can see there's all of these different citation formats. So the default is APA. And in many ways, if it doesn't matter as long as we're consistent, right? So I can copy this to the clipboard, and now I can go to, let's say, Word. Do Word. I can start a new document. And now comes the magic. I right click, and and there it is. So this is everything, all of these articles formatted properly. Now, properly only there's somewhere if you scan this, you're like, well, that's not quite right. That's not quite right. And that's because if the information isn't sitting correctly in the database, there's no magic, right? So like if there's an article like this one here from Carla and Erica and Jerry, that has all the right information in it. So this reference look is exactly the way you want it to. But then if you have something like this one here, Sturgey and Casey on the right, the not dated one, it's sort of missing where this is from. So that's because that's not sitting in the database. And that's why having somebody to go in and make sure that everything is updated and tagged is really valuable, because then you don't have to think about it in this kind of a context. And the last thing very quickly, which is also kind of magical, is you can do things like, and let me do a good one for this. So I'm just going to do this as an example. So let's say you have these two references here at the bottom, and you're like, you know what? I want to share this with somebody. Somebody's like, hey, what do you have on, and you're like, oh, on competency-based education. You're like, oh, these are good. So you can select these and any other combination of PDFs, and you can right-click this, and you can export these. Then there's different option. So there's an addition that you can have that's called this particular BibTeX PDF export. So I can export the files, hit OK, put it somewhere, let's say my desktop, give it a name and call this CBE sample. Boom, done. And now I can go to my desktop, find my CBE sample that I just created. There it is. Double click, and it has a PDF folder, and boom, there they are. So if somebody, and I've seen colleagues do this and has always impressed me, so I am late to this game, but you have colleagues who are like, hey, in your committee, you've worked on this issue. Can you give me do you have like frameworks or like templates for doing this on this topic? You're like, oh yeah, let me pull something together for you. And like within a minute, you can give somebody else like 15, 20 or more resources and be like, here, this is what we have on this topic. It is really amazing for empowering others to really to have quick access to this. It's not perfect, but but for us, I think it has already done I think a lot. We already up to 161, and my message has always been, this will not get better. Like, I mean, we'll have more and more and more, and we already across committees, you can imagine, we're already in the hundreds of resources, and then depending on what you pull in, we are going to be at some point in the thousands in this project over multiple years. It's not like we're doing research hardcore, but we are doing research by finding good, even if it's just blogs and videos and all of that. So
there's a question from Azurdi about, is this for our committee? And if it is for our committee, how do we get access to it?
Yeah, that was my next point. Thanks, Azurdi, for bringing this up. So, there is, the way I can give you access is very easy. I can add your email into the website as I like manage the groups, and I can just add everyone if you wanted to. I just didn't want to send that to you before today and just be like, and get another email, and is that spam or not? Is that spam or not? So we can do this in two ways. And honestly, I'm not sure what's best. One way is I just add everybody, and then you all have access and you can ignore it if you don't want it. That's, I think, logistically the easy one. The other one is, if you are interested in this at this point or later, you just write me a quick email to arub@ncie and say like, hey, can you add me under this email address to this? And I'll gladly do that. I honestly, I don't know. Maybe I should ask, is there a way to ask this question? Susan, do you have often good ideas? Do you have a good idea for how to ask this question about like giving everybody access or by request?
Can we go back several years and you give me that before I did my dissertation?
I know, right? There's a video. There's a video on YouTube that I found by a gentleman who talks about how artificial intelligence, like modern digital tools, make research unbelievably efficient now, where you can do this with like synthesis, meta-analyses, and they automatically write, certain programs write you abstracts, and they curate things for you in ways that even he goes like, this, when I did my dissertation, this is not that long ago in many ways, but it's still amazing what we can do, and it's only going to get better.
Yeah.
And that's also why I think we should be doing this, some version of this, But so anyway, does anybody?
I think the lower burden solution is just to add everybody, and then people can ignore it if they don't want to deal with it.
Yeah. So if somebody does not want to have their name added, maybe write to me. Let's do that, and then I'll maybe give me to tomorrow, given what time we have today. So by the end of day tomorrow, you should get an email that says you're invited to join this group library, which is the one on the bottom here that you see here, where there's the 160 resources. And importantly, as you then, if you have access, right, you can add, like you can, if you come across something new on it, you're searching something, Google something, come across an article that a colleague has shared, find a browser that you like, download the plugin for this, and then, add it right away to the library, or do it manually by uploading the file into this joint library, so we all can benefit from that. I think that'll be really helpful. There you go.
Thank you, Andre. So in the interest of time, I'll turn it back to our BHAG just to give you all a show of where we landed. It looks like we have 8 of the 12 of us, and I misspoke earlier. I apologize. It was, we have 12 members here, not 15. So 8 of the 12 members are in favor of idea 1, with 2 members interested in idea 2 and 2 members interested in idea 3. So in light of our discussion about voting that we just had, we will give all of our members an opportunity to weigh in, not just those who are able to be here tonight, but this will give you a sense of what the trend is so far. And then it looks like many of you, 9 out of the 12, are interested in that subcommittee. So for those of you who may be interested in volunteering to be on that subcommittee, I will be leading that work. And please raise your hands today. Let me know you're interested, or you can just send me an email. All of this will be in our follow-up email to the committee, so you won't miss the boat. But that will be quick work. The Board of Education is meeting in August. Suzanne, I see you. And they are having a board retreat in early August where they'll be discussing a lot of the issues, and it would be great to have our committee members or our recommendations from our committee available at that point for them to consider. So thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Suzanne, and others can think about it. You haven't missed the boat on that. And so that's the end of the BHAG conversation for tonight. Kathy, Sarah, Jennifer, did you want to close it out?
I don't think that I have anything else to add. Kathy, Jennifer, or anything that I'm forgetting about that we need to discuss before we get off? Kathy's got her hand raised. Kathy, you're on mute.
No, hand raise was for Susan.
Okay,
That was what the hand raise was for.
gotcha. Okay.
I
So
think
I appreciate.
Esther D has her hand up as well. That may have been for Susan as well.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
What you got?
Just real quick, letting everybody know, we have 7 people on my little micro committee. So we do have representation from every group, and we have started discussing outliers and have already found new outliers that were not originally included in our conversations. So we will be continuing that work and filling out a new form to discuss areas of need. And so last final call, because we're hitting the ground running. Just message me if you're interested at all, but the 7 of us are charging forward. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you,
Can I ask then quickly, like thinking about the next meeting, right? So we'll meet again in a month from now. Do you think there's something that you would like to share, like present on behalf of your group with us, with the committee?
Oh, I think we'll definitely be ready to have a document to share out to all 3 groups by then.
Awesome. Yeah, nice.
So I would remind everyone that our next meeting is in a month, as Andre just said. It is on Monday, June 5th. So if you would mark your calendars for that, the same time, 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern time. For those of our friends on Central Time, we live on Eastern Time over here. So and then look for emails from our chairs for continued information, how we can start on both the voting so that all of our members can vote on the next goal, as well as then your formal interest in Susan and working with recommendations to the board on those graduation requirements. So look for more communications on that. And then we'll see you back here in person or virtually, actually, in June.
Okay. All right. I really appreciate everybody's participation tonight. It was a great discussion, lots of points raised, lots of things to consider. Looking forward to continuing this work with you all over the course of the next month. And we'll be sending out some follow-up information later on this week. Maybe next week. We'll see. All right. Thanks so much. Y'all have a good night.
Good night.
Thank you.